have the greatest job in the world, and that's working with dogs.
Best in Show winner is the French Bulldog.
Winston won the National Dog Show. It was amazing. It was exciting. And to have a dog to be #1 dog in this country, you have to have great nutrition. And I always fed Pro Plan. Just like us, when we eat well, we feel good. And I just love that food and what it's done all these years to all the dogs I've bred and all the dogs I've shown.
Welcome to Pure Dog Talk. I am your host, Laura Reeves. And all right, you guys, I promised you some really exciting stuff working with some of our partners at Purina. And today we have Dr. Anne Valuska, who is the behaviorist for Purina overall, global, from what I saw on your email. Is that right? I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And Dr. Annie brings us a lot of knowledge, a lot of background in behavioral research. And so welcome, Dr. Annie. I'm really, really excited to have you here on this particular topic.
Thank you. This is certainly an interesting one.
This is one of my favorites. I will always, always, always find people to talk to me about this. So let's start with behavior as nature versus nurture. How much is genetic? How much is what we put into it as breeders with our puppies and our dams? And how much is on the owners? Like, do you give that a 30-30-30? Where do you fall on that?
Oof. I mean, that is
I know it's a big, I'm like throwing down right here.
We're starting off strong. I think even for any animal, that is a challenging question. But I think for dogs in particular, that might be the muddiest waters out there.
Why do you think I brought the absolute expert to talk about it? Because it is, and everybody's got an opinion. I mean, you know what they say. And so I want the most expert and informed opinion. So let's hash it out, man.
So the reason that it's so complicated with dogs is because dogs have been domesticated for longer than any other species on Earth. They, have this long history of kind of co-evolving with us. And as a result, in my opinion, it is now in dogs' nature to be nurtured by us. And so that just really, really blurs the lines.
That is fascinating. Say more about that.
Yeah. So dogs have, everybody that loves dogs, you don't have to be a scientist to know that there's something really special in that bond. But the science behind it is really cool.
Yes.
And it all started with the domestication. So dogs diverged from a common wolf-like ancestor about 15,000 years ago, based on the latest science. And there's a lot of evidence that they kind of domesticated themselves, that the friendliest, most outgoing wolves, we'll call them, were willing to approach people for the benefits that we could provide, mostly food. And then those wolves produced more offspring. They survived longer. They had higher fitness in evolutionary terms. They produced offspring that were also friendly, tame, curious, approachable. And then over generations, we've ended up with the dogs that we know and love today. And while there are several differences between dogs and wolves, most of the big ones are really defined by the fact that dogs have this relationship with humans. They have, for example, changes in their digestive system that allow them to digest carbohydrates much more effectively than wolves can. They have changes in the muscles around their eyes that allow them to make that puppy dog eye expression and show the whites of their eyes that we respond really strongly to. So they've kind of hijacked that in us. And one of the coolest changes, in my opinion, is that dogs are so much better, just naturally, at paying attention to and responding to what we're doing. So things like where we're looking, they will respond to our pointing gestures by going to where we're pointing. They do this pretty much innately. Puppies are kind of made to respond to people. Wolves just can't do that, even when they are raised and socialized exactly like the dogs are in these studies. And so that certainly speaks to something about the DNA, right? The genetic changes, what makes a dog a dog. makes them attuned to us and wanting to build that relationship and that bond with us.
Okay. So let's talk about when the genetic component of that is makes a dog say, we'll use fearful. Okay. So dogs that should not be fearful are fearful in society. And how much can we talk about using this as a specific example of a behavior? How much of that do you find or can you pin down to being genetic, early nurture, late nurture, for lack of any other way to talk about it?
Yeah, I don't think the science on that is capable of providing
Okay.
a discrete answer.
Okay.
But in my opinion, based on my experience and
Mhm.
the studies that I'm familiar with,
Mhm.
I think of the genetic component as starting the dog somewhere on a spectrum. It's
Okay.
like dropping that dog
Mhm.
on the spectrum from extremely fearful to
Mhm.
extremely friendly.
Mhm.
Their genes are giving them a starting place.
Okay.
I think that the socialization and training that the dog gets throughout their lifetime
Mhm.
can absolutely move them on that spectrum.
Okay.
Now, a dog that has a genetic background that is resulting in them being on the very far fearful end is probably never, ever going to be socialized well enough
Sure.
to get to the very far friendly end. There is a limit to
Sure.
how far on that spectrum they can move from where their genes drop them. But I think there is generally a lot more wiggle room there than many people give credit for. And
Okay.
one of the interesting studies on this that came out just a couple years ago in 2022 was looking at
Mhm.
breed specific
Yeah.
genetic background and
Right.
behaviors. And what that study found was that while the genetics of specific breeds were pretty tightly correlated with physical traits,
Mhm.
there was really not much behaviorally,
Interesting.
which surprised a lot of people because there
Yeah.
are beliefs that, oh, golden retrievers have this temperament and some of these more ancient breeds have this
Mm.
temperament.
Mm.
But there was not much evidence for that in that study. That
Interesting.
there, in fact, was more, almost as much variability within a breed as there was between breeds.
Interesting. Okay, so let's take what you're talking about in that study then and spin that out to inherited traits like, say, pointing or herding. Okay, so I'm going to use pointing because I have a breed that is a pointing breed.
Mhm.
So pointing is a genetic thing. Like dogs do that genetically. It's developed from the stalking response, right? Genetically, certain dogs have a stronger desire to point than others do within a breed and between breeds, right? So we know that there's a genetic piece to that, and then it's developed. Again, are you able to um, isolate any information on those types of characteristics that we are breeding for a selective breeding, right? To make those a stronger thing? Do you have research on that that points to how successful or unsuccessful or pointless this entire thing is?
So again, going back to that same
Mhm.
2022
Right.
paper, I think the reason that the physical traits are so much more strongly linked genetically and can be
Mhm.
traced to breeds than the behavioral traits is because the physical traits that we're talking about are they're very easy to
Mhm.
see.
Mhm.
They're easy to define. You
Mhm.
can tell if the ear is flopped over or standing straight up. You
Right.
tell if there's spots on the coat or not.
Right.
And so on and so forth. And that makes the selection process easier.
Mhm.
The types of behaviors that study was looking at were much more amorphous, I would say. So things
Mm.
like biddability, for example,
Oh,
or
okay.
aggression, like these
Mhm.
kind of larger
Right.
concepts. I think for behaviors like pointing
Mhm.
and herding and
Mhm.
retrieving,
Right.
those are much more discrete. And
Mhm.
while I'm not familiar with any papers that have
Mhm.
looked at the genetics of those traits
I'm just
specifically, they may
saying,
be
I've got
out
a
there.
suggestion.
But it would not surprise me if those behaviors are closer to the physical traits than
Okay.
the types
Right.
of behaviors that paper looked at, just because
Okay.
they are very specific and
Mhm.
they are easily identified. It
Mhm.
is almost as easy, I imagine, to breed for a strong point as it is to breed for a red coat. Like you
Right.
can, the dog has it or they don't.
Right.
And so it wouldn't surprise me if those very specific kind of traits are highly heritable and linked
Right.
to the breed. But I think once you start getting into broader kind of temperament
Sure.
topics, I don't think that's as closely linked to the genetics or
Sure.
the breed as a lot of people think.
Okay. So that's actually really, really useful and really helpful. And I think informs us as breeders, right? When we're raising our puppies, we can make a pretty enormous difference on our, our slide rule, right? Of how those puppies are, and that owners can also move that needle. Is that what I'm taking away from this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It would be a huge mistake for a breeder to sell themselves short when it comes to how much they can influence the final temperament of that puppy. And there's some really interesting studies that back that up. I
I'm all
mentioned
ears.
ancient breeds earlier.
Right.
I think they have this reputation of being kind of the cat of the dog
Yes.
world.
I own a Shiba Inu and I have owned Akitas. So yes, cats,
Yes.
definitely cats.
I've heard people say that they've been shaped more by natural selection than artificial selection.
Oh, interesting.
Studies have found that those breeds tend to take longer to make eye contact with humans, and they gaze at humans for shorter periods during an unsolvable task, which is a study paradigm compared with other breed groups. And I think a key study that's been done found that owners, when they were surveyed about this, they believed that their ancient breed dogs had lower attachment and less attention-seeking behavior than other breeds. So that starts to paint this picture that, like, okay, yeah, there are genetic differences. These ancient breeds are just, they're going to be more aloof. They're not going to be as open to socialization as my golden retriever. But there have been some other studies coming out showing that following the administration of oxytocin, which is kind of this cuddle hormone, ancient breeds did show increased gazing behavior with people. And ancient breeds also show higher oxytocin levels after interaction with their owners. So this suggests that maybe with more interaction with people, they might start to behave more like the European breeds do.
So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely. And then another study really got to this. They looked at hunting breeds, herding breeds, and ancient breeds. And they found that the hunting and herding breed dogs looked at people more than dogs from ancient breeds at 4 months of age and in adulthood. But there was no difference between the puppies from those three groups at 2 months of age, which suggests that, again, they have the same potential, but it was the way they were trained and socialized that had the impact on their ultimate behavior as adults, not their genetic underlying values.
So I'm also going to take this to, it's never to the dog, it's always the people.
As a behaviorist, that is generally my experience. I mostly counsel the human on what they're
but that's what I'm saying. There's really no such thing as a bad dog. There are situations in bad dogs in bad situations with people that are not helping the dog. How's that? But I think that's really, really fascinating. And I think it goes so far down the road. And the piece you were talking about the slider, that's really kind of like turning my wheels in my brain when I think about, say, for example, dogs in my own breed, or families of dogs where you see a particular thing. And then you start to say, okay, so how much of that is the slider of the temperament and how much of that is the particular raising protocol that family is implemented with their dogs over generations.
And yeah, absolutely. And we kind of touched on this earlier, but it's not even just the actual practices, you know, the step-by-step
Mhm.
checklist.
Mhm.
The fact is that our perceptions of and expectations of our pets change our behavior, and then our behavior change the dog's behavior. So that's why this gets so tricky to tease apart, because if you have
Symbiotic.
Mhm.
I love this. Okay. So the symbiosis of owners and dogs. Interesting.
And to get back to the, you know, the
Mhm.
cats of the dog world,
Right.
I think we see the same problem in cats. A lot of people assume, oh, cats aren't social, they're aloof, they're independent, they're,
Mhm.
you know, not X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
And so then they don't ask their cat to be social. They don't put in the work to socialize their cat and give them positive exposures with people. And then when
Oh,
their
that's
cat runs and
interesting.
hides when someone comes to the house, it fulfills what they already believe. Oh yeah, cats aren't social. I think the same things can happen with our dogs. If we believe that, oh, this dog is this breed, so they're not going to be like this,
Mhm.
then you don't put in the effort
Mm.
during socialization to
Mm.
encourage those traits. Well, yeah, then they grow up exactly how you expect them to, because you're not laying the foundation for them
Oh.
to have any other temperament as an adult.
Okay,
There's
so this
so
is really fascinating because I mentioned I own a Shiba, right? And I've raised him since he was a baby. And I know the breeder I got him from is very specific, but he thinks he's a wire-haired pointer. He actually has no concept that he's a Shiba Inu. And I mean, he's had dogs attack him aggressively and just looked at them like, what's your problem? Right? Would completely atypical Shiba behavior.
Mhm.
He loves everyone and every dog. Completely atypical Shiba behavior. But if what you're, I mean, basing, the transition of what you're saying to the actual lived experience of this particular Shiba, my expectation is that these dogs are going to get along and you're going to be nice and you're going to be friendly and so that interesting. Absolutely. I thought he was just weird.
He just was raised by somebody that expected more from him, and dogs generally, again, this is kind of what they've been domesticated to do, to pay attention to what we want and meet us there.
Oh my God, this is really, really fascinating, you guys. Stop and think about all of the dogs in your life and in your breed and put this sliding scale on it and the symbiotic nature of it. Oh, it's fascinating. Okay. So I love this. So talk to us about back to some of these discrete behaviors we're talking about, right? So specifically, um, instinct, right? That has been selectively bred for, is chosen, made stronger by that selective breeding. I mean, that's just the concept of if we're not doing that when we're breeding dogs, we're not doing what we're supposed to, right? Um, are there markers? Is there science-y stuff, right? Sorry for my lack of technological skills here. Is there science behind that? And are there studies that can discuss breeding practices that will help um, emphasize or build those specific discrete behaviors that we're asking them to do? Say it's pointing, say it's retrieving, what have you.
I I suspect that those are two different answers,
Oh,
or two different
okay.
questions. So the
Okay.
first question about whether there are, you know, specific genes that can be
Mhm.
linked to
Mhm.
these instinctive behaviors, I do not know, frankly. I'm
Okay.
not a geneticist. I
Okay.
would, if someone does know, I would love to hear about
Right.
it.
Right. Exactly.
Find that expert, please let me know. I'll
I
listen to
will
that
absolutely.
episode.
I'll hook you guys up.
So I'm not sure about that.
Mhm.
But in terms of whether, you know, how to effectively breed for those
Mhm.
traits,
Mhm.
I'm not a breeder,
Mhm.
but I imagine that it will likely be more effective to breed based on what you can see
See. Okay.
versus some
Mhm.
sort of genetic test, because
Mhm.
genetics are are weird, right?
Weird.
Sometimes there's these epigenetic effects. The
Yeah.
environment can have an impact on
Right.
how those genes are expressed.
Right.
So I would think, kind of like I was saying before, that the breeding should be based on those behaviors that you can see. And if you can think about those behaviors like more like a physical trait, if there are standards, even for within your own kennel, about what level of this trait you want to see, and if you can develop, certain assessments for it that you run your breeding dogs through, that's, as a behaviorist, that's how I would approach it. But like I said, genetically, I'm not sure.
Right. No, this is really valuable and interesting to me, because everybody approaches dog breeding differently, right? Like I want to focus on X, and that's what I'm gonna do. And I don't know, in today's world, particularly like bird dogs, right? Fewer people go hunting, fewer people are looking for a hunting companion. So fewer and fewer breeders are paying as close of attention, right, to those specific things. And so for me, just talking through the process, right, of thinking of pointing as if it was a physical trait that you can breed for, as much as you can breed for a small ear, a dark eye, a good coat, etc., I think is really valuable to people, and something that we can really absolutely, move forward with, right? I love it.
Trupanion is revolutionizing medical insurance for pets by providing the best possible experience to our members. And it's not some space-age dream. It's happening now. We pay your veterinarian directly while you're checking out, and we're the only ones who can, which means you have decisions in seconds, and you don't have to wait for reimbursement. So unlike with other providers, you'll keep more money in your pocket. Ask your veterinarian if Trupanion can pay them directly, because there's pet insurance, and then there's Trupanion.
I've been trying to get this organized, as I was just saying, for months. Dr. Anne Valuska is here from Purina. She is a behavioral scientist, and she is hugely active in Purina's Purple Leash Project, which is such an amazing and powerful program for domestic violence survivors and people who have pets who need to get out of a situation. And it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month here in October, and by the skin of our teeth, we're going to get this in. So welcome, Dr. Annie. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Excellent. We had, just for everybody else, we had some technological difficulties, so we're kind of struggling this morning, but we got it. So we're excited. So Annie, talk to me about the Purple Leash, because this is a project that's very, very near and dear to my heart. I know to yours. What got you started in this particular project?
Yes, so Purple Leash is very near and dear to my heart because I am a survivor of domestic violence myself. So being able to marry this cause that I'm really passionate about with helping survivors, and obviously very passionate about pets, I just think this is such an important project, and I'm not in charge of it. I am one of many Purina folks and Red Rover folks that are on this team, but it's definitely one of my favorite things about my job. I started my involvement in the Purple Leash Project, I guess technically before it was officially a project. Back in 2017, I got to visit a domestic violence shelter, or the site of a future domestic violence shelter that would be the first in New York State to be pet friendly, and really got to weigh in on how this should come together, what kinds of flooring and furniture they would need to make it as much of a safe space for the pets that would be residing there as it would be for the human survivors. And that was such a rewarding experience, and I've gotten to do work like that ever since.
I love that. So for listeners who aren't as familiar with the project, please fill us in, give us the whole broad spectrum. What is it exactly that the Purple Leash is doing for survivors and for people in this situation?
So in everything that we do, Purina's mission is to keep and bring people and pets together. And when we learned the statistic that nearly half of domestic violence survivors delay leaving because they cannot take their pets with them into shelter, we really wanted to be part of the solution to that problem. So in 2019, we created the Purple Leash Project in partnership with Red Rover, with the goal of helping more domestic violence shelters become pet friendly.
Excellent. And so, I mean, again, this is something with which I'm familiar, but talk to me about, just talk us through some of those really serious considerations for women in this situation. They stay and in a violent situation because of children, because of pets, whatever it is. And so what are some of the ramifications for the shelters, right? Like what types of considerations did they have to make to consider bringing in someone in a situation who has a pet?
Yeah, so the work that we've gotten to do with pet-friendly shelters can take a lot of forms. We really try to meet shelters where they are. Sometimes that involves renovating specific apartments to be more pet-friendly. I've personally been involved in training shelter staff so that those staff are more comfortable with pets. You know, unfortunately, the animals themselves are often victims of abuse or are threatened by the abuser, and part of the manipulation tactic that the abuser uses to keep the survivor in that home. And so the pets can sometimes come in with some trauma themselves. And so the goal of that training was really to ensure that the shelter staff understood where the pets were coming from, really grounding them in understanding pet body language so that they would be equipped to try to get a handle on how that pet is feeling, and also feel more empowered to safely interact with those pets. We also provide information on the kinds of supplies that the shelters will need to be able to be that safe space for the pets. Sometimes we have participated in helping to build a separate area where the pets could be safely housed. So again, we really try to meet these shelters where they are and fill the gaps and give them the training and resources that they don't currently have in order to be able to welcome pets into those facilities. We do that through granting sometimes, other times we're more directly involved. And we also helped pass the PAWS Act coalition in support of the Pets and Women's Safety, that's the PAWS acronym, Pets and Women's Safety Act, which helps domestic violence survivors and their pets by advocating for federal resources dedicated to this cause. So now Purina and other members of the PAWS Act coalition are continuing our efforts to lobby for federal funding and additional support on Capitol Hill to just continue this.
I mean, that is so important. It's not just money, it's space, right? It's facilities. We have a housing shortage in this country already, right? And so finding a place to house women and pets and children safely, right? And sometimes secretly and securely away from where people can find them. I mean, this is real and it's a lot. So can you talk about some of your success stories? Do you have specific stories you can share on that?
I don't know about
How
specific.
safely, right?
I mean, certainly from a numbers perspective, when we started this project in 2019, less than 10% of domestic violence shelters allowed survivors with pets.
Wow.
And today, we are approaching 20% of DV shelters being pet friendly. So that is a huge step in the right direction. Obviously,
double the number in 5 years. That's pretty awesome.
Yes.
I don't know why my email keeps coming into my Zoom, but hey. So I just think that's amazing. And talk to us fundraising, talk to us about what are things that listeners to this podcast can do that would enable, that would be supportive, right? Is that fundraising? Is that volunteering? What does that look like?
Absolutely. And there are so many ways that people can get involved. I think the easiest one is just to help us raise awareness.
I can do that, man.
Yeah. And once someone shares with you that, hey, a lot of abuse survivors don't leave because they can't take their pets with them, it seems so obvious but it is not something a lot of people think about initially. And as a result, we can struggle to get what we need in this space. So just help us raise that awareness. Talk to your friends and family about this topic. Look for ways to help out and make that connection when you can. If people want to get more directly involved, they can also go to purpleleashproject.com. There you can not only donate to Red Rover or find a shelter nearby, and some of those shelters have wish lists that you can donate directly to, but purpleleashproject.com is also a site where you can find some more resources just on the topic in general.
It's amazing. And I mean, as I mentioned at the top, this is a subject that is very, very personal to me. I've had my dogs threatened, that if I left, that they wouldn't be there when I got back. I have lived this personally, audience, listeners. I'm telling you, this is real. And if you want to talk about raising awareness, lived experience will do that for a person. And so I strongly suggest that everybody check out the Purple Leash Project and any ways that we can help build that supply of safe spaces for people to go with their pets, with their dogs, because domestic violence is a very, very real issue in our world. This has been really valuable, and I really appreciate your time. And I look forward to picking your brain in the future on other topics.
Yeah, this was my pleasure. I would come back anytime.
Excellent. I love it. That's my favorite. I just want people to come talk to me about cool and smart stuff. Awesome. All right. Thanks very much, Annie.